In the gentle hush before sunrise, when the stars still faintly linger over the rooftops of the eternal city, a man named Lucius stirs from his modest bed in a quiet insula on the Aventine Hill, nestled among other sleeping homes in the slow-breathing hush of early morning Rome. The thin light of dawn filters through a woven reed curtain, spilling a soft amber hue across the clay-tiled floor, where his sandals sit neatly beside a folded woolen tunic of cream and faded blue. Lucius is not a senator, nor a soldier, nor a merchant shouting prices in the forum. He is a librarian, custodian of scrolls, keeper of parchment, a humble servant of knowledge in a city that pulses with ambition, trade, and tradition. He sits up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and takes a quiet moment to listen. To the coo of doves in the eaves, the faint clatter of a distant cart, the whisper of wind stirring fig leaves outside his window. He lights a small oil lamp with practiced hands and begins his morning ritual, washing his face with water drawn the night before from a public fountain, then dressing with care, his movements unrushed, his breath steady. The streets outside are still cool and mostly empty as he steps out, closing the wooden door behind him, locking it with a bronze pin. He carries a small shoulder bag made of soft leather. Within it, a wrapped fig cake, a wax tablet, and a reed pen. His path to the library takes him down a cobbled street lined with sleeping shops, bakeries yet to open, shutters still drawn. But the city stirs slowly. A woman sweeps her doorstep, a boy leads a sleepy donkey, and the scent of bread baking begins to drift from unseen ovens. Lucius nods politely to passers-by, but speaks little. He prefers the hush, the gentle stillness before the city truly wakes, when even Rome feels like a whisper. He passes the Temple of Portunus, its slender columns catching the rising sun, and crosses the quiet Forum Boarium, where the marble statues of long-forgotten heroes stand watch in silence. As he approaches the Atrium Libertatis, the public library housed within a stately hall near the Basilica Julia, he takes a moment to pause on its steps, gazing at the rising light that gilds the rooftops and temples across the Tiber. The building, though not as grand as the Capitoline Hill's institutions, holds within it a treasure more precious to Lucius than gold or wine or applause. Shelves upon shelves of scrolls, orderly, fragile, eternal. Inside, the library is hushed, its tall windows letting in golden light that warms the marble floor and the wood-paneled walls. Lucius enters quietly, greeted only by the faint rustle of a scroll unrolling somewhere in the stacks and the soft sweeping of a fellow librarian's broom. He nods, then walks to the clerk's desk, setting down his tablet and stretching his fingers before beginning his morning duties. There is no rush here. Everything is done with care, reverence, rhythm. He checks the catalog of borrowed texts, updating a tally of who has taken which scroll and when they are due. The scrolls themselves, made of papyrus, some centuries old, are stored in pigeonhole shelves, each wrapped with a leather tie, tagged with a small wooden marker denoting the author and subject. Lucius retrieves a few from the archive. A copy of Virgil's Georgics, a medical treatise by Galen, and a worn scroll on early Etruscan rites. He examines them gently, smoothing the curled edges, replacing any damaged ties, and wiping dust with a soft linen cloth. From time to time, patrons arrive, mostly scribes, teachers, a quiet senator's aide, and Lucius helps them without hurry, guiding them to the correct alcove, offering a stool, occasionally reading aloud if someone's eyesight falters. The hours pass quietly, marked only by the movement of sunlight across the floor and the quiet echoes of sandals on stone. At midday, Lucius steps outside to sit on a stone bench beneath a fig tree, just beyond the library's colonnade. He unwraps his fig cake, sipping watered wine from a clay flask, and watches a bee circle lazily in the warm air. Around him, Rome continues its day, louder now, but still at a distance from this pocket of peace. He hears children laughing in the distance, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the mutter of passing conversation, and yet none of it breaks the stillness of his thoughts, which drift, as they often do, to old stories, myths, and the slow turning of generations like pages in a book. After lunch, he returns to copy a few lines from a fading scroll into a fresh one, his reed pen dipping carefully into ink, each letter formed with a scholar's patience. The words are not his own, but in preserving them, he feels a quiet kinship with those long gone, scribes in Alexandria, monks in distant hills, nameless hands who passed on the memory of humanity, one line at a time. The day slowly folds into afternoon, then toward evening, as shadows grow longer across the library floor. Lucius completes his final tasks, returning scrolls to their proper places, sweeping the reading room gently, extinguishing half the lamps. He says farewell to the junior clerk, who locks the door behind them, and together they descend the steps, parting ways at the fountain. Lucius walks home as the sky shifts to dusky rose, and the oil lamps of the city begin to flicker on, one by one. The streets are busier now, but Lucius walks with quiet contentment, taking a slightly longer route past a bakery where he buys a small round loaf for supper. Back in his apartment, he lights a lamp and eats his bread with olives and cheese, watching the sky darken through the open window. He thinks of the scrolls, of the hands that wrote them, of the people who will one day read them long after he is gone. He feels no urgency, no fear, only the soft, steady rhythm of life, like parchment unrolling slowly, revealing its tale. As the night deepens and the city quiets once more, Lucius extinguishes the lamp and lies down on his mat, the scent of ink and paper still lingering on his fingers, the silence of the library echoing gently in his dreams. The stars emerge slowly over Rome, soft and silver in the indigo sky, as Lucius drifts into a state between waking and sleep, lying on his woven mat, hands folded gently across his chest, his breathing steady and deep. Outside his window, the quiet murmur of the city has softened into near silence, interrupted only now and then by the faint bark of a dog in a distant courtyard or the creak of a wooden cart returning late from the market. Somewhere far off, A flute plays a slow, wandering melody. Perhaps a street musician closing the night with one final tune. The air carries the faint scent of lavender and dust, and Lucius, still dressed in his soft linen tunic, allows his thoughts to meander through memory, history, and the scrolls he handled earlier in the day, names of authors, phrases from old poems, the clean lines of carefully inked letters. Sleep finds him gently, not as a sharp descent, but as a quiet dimming, like a lamp slowly running out of oil, and his dreams are soft and indistinct. Flickers of parchment, gentle voices reciting lines of Homer, and the distant lapping of the Tiber River at dawn. Morning returns with the cooing of pigeons and the golden slant of sunlight slipping once again through the reed curtain, dappling the floor in shifting patterns. Lucius opens his eyes slowly, his limbs still heavy with sleep, and for a moment he simply lies there, watching the tiny motes of dust float lazily in the air, as if time itself had slowed to a pause. Rising once more, he performs the same rituals as always, pouring cool water into a clay basin to wash his face, lighting the small oil lamp again, dressing without haste, and eating a small breakfast of leftover bread dipped in olive oil. There is no need for urgency. The scrolls will not vanish, and Rome, in all its enormity, moves at its own eternal rhythm. As he steps out into the morning light, the city greets him again with soft sounds and familiar faces. The baker he passes each day now smiles and lifts a warm loaf from his oven, nodding to Lucius in a quiet exchange. An old woman tends to potted herbs outside her door, clipping sprigs of rosemary with care. Children run down the narrow street, laughing, their voices echoing between walls hung with laundry strung on ropes like sails between ships. Lucius walks a slightly different route this morning, one that takes him along the edge of the Aventine, where gardens grow wild behind walled villas, and ivy trails down ancient stone. He stops briefly at a small shrine tucked into the side of a building, a household god painted with fading color, offering a handful of flowers and a whispered word of thanks for the peacefulness of life. When he reaches the library, he unlocks the door himself this time, arriving a bit earlier than usual, relishing the deep quiet that lives in the hour just after sunrise. The interior is cool and still, the scent of parchment and beeswax lingering in the air. He walks among the shelves, not yet lighting the lamps, allowing the dimness to remain for a while longer, like a temple awaiting the morning rites. Today, he plans to work on restoring a damaged scroll, one that came in last week with water-stained edges and a tear through its center. He retrieves it carefully, unwrapping the leather tie, spreading it out across a wide table laid with clean linen. His fingers move with practiced delicacy, smoothing the fibers, aligning the torn edges, and preparing a strip of papyrus to bind the two halves. It is slow work, the kind of task that could take hours, but Lucius prefers it that way. Each stroke of the adhesive brush, each breath held while aligning a seam, becomes a small meditation, a quiet reminder of the fragility of knowledge and the care required to preserve it. As the morning light strengthens and slips in through the high windows, the library begins to stir, A young girl no more than 15 arrives carrying a scroll in a protective case, a delivery from a wealthy household nearby. Lucius greets her with a soft smile and offers her a cup of watered wine while she waits for the receipt. She tells him of her training in letters, of how she hopes to work with scrolls one day. And Lucius listens patiently, encouraging her with gentle words and a short tale of a woman scholar from Alexandria. After she leaves, he walks slowly through the stacks, checking for misfiled texts, adjusting tags and pausing, now and then to read a line or two from scrolls he hasn't seen in years. Words like old friends, waiting silently to be remembered. At midday, he joins a few other librarians in the shaded courtyard behind the building, where a vine-covered trellis offers protection from the sun. They eat their lunches in companionable silence, mostly bread, cheese, dried figs, and share small stories about unusual scrolls, strange patron requests, or the latest rumors drifting from the Senate. There is no gossip here, no sharp debate, only the quiet bond of those who care for things most others ignore. Lucius finds comfort in their company, but also in the slow return to solitude when he re-enters the library. The cool hush wrapping around him like a familiar cloak. The afternoon passes with more copying, the slow scratch of reed pen on parchment echoing in the otherwise silent hall. He pauses often to stretch his fingers, to sip water from a clay cup, to stand near a window and watch the clouds drift lazily over the rooftops of the city. Once, a sudden gust of wind causes a hanging scroll to sway slightly on its wooden hook, and he secures it with care, murmuring a quiet word of reassurance, as if it were a living thing. A few patrons come and go, one a retired centurion with an interest in herbal remedies, another a young man preparing to give a speech in the forum. Lucius helps them both without judgment, finding the texts they need and offering suggestions with a voice as calm as water in a basin. As shadows lengthen again and the sun begins its descent, he tidies the scroll tables, straightens the wax tablets, and extinguishes the extra lamps one by one. The quiet returns deeper now, as if the library itself is preparing to sleep. Lucius walks home slowly, following a different path again past a small school where children recite verse aloud, their voices rhythmic and sweet, past a stable where a tired horse is being brushed down by candlelight, past a corner where a street vendor folds up his cart for the night. The world slows, softens, sighs. When he reaches his home, he lights a lamp and sits for a while by the window, eating a simple supper of lentils and honeyed dates, then unrolls a small scroll of poetry not to study, not for duty, but simply for the comfort of the words. The lamp flickers, casting golden ripples across the walls, and the lines of verse slip into his thoughts like a lullaby. The sky darkens, the air cools, and once again Lucius prepares for sleep, laying down with the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived, not heroic, not grand, but filled with care, with purpose, and with the gentle beauty of preserving stories for another dawn. The next morning, a breeze stirs early over the rooftops of Rome, rustling awnings and whispering down narrow alleyways still heavy with the scent of sleep and stone. and Lucius wakes with the feeling that the day will pass like a page slowly turned quiet, deliberate and gentle. He rises again at dawn, as is his custom, but this time lingers a moment longer by the window, watching the city come to life through the drifting curtain of light mist. The streets below his window glisten faintly with dew. A passing mule-drawn cart creaks by with bundles of straw, the driver humming softly, barely more than a breath. Lucius breathes in deeply, the air cooler than usual, touched by the coming of autumn, and as he dresses, he chooses a slightly thicker tunic, woven from undyed wool and smelling faintly of sun and storage. His fingers move unhurried as he folds and ties, the simple movements anchoring him to the rhythm of the morning. With his leather bag slung once more across his shoulder, scroll case secured at his side, he steps out into the pale light, nodding to a neighbor watering her potted basil as the scent of crushed leaves rises faintly between them. His walk today is especially quiet, as if the city itself respects the gentle rhythm of those few early risers who move through it with quiet purpose. He stops briefly at a small vendor cart where he buys a honeyed sesame cakes, the baker's apprentice handing it to him with a sleepy smile and smudged flour on his cheek, then continues onward past old stone walls covered in creeping ivy, the roots of which have lived longer than many emperors. At the Atrium Libertatis, he pauses once more on the steps, not from weariness, but from the familiar affection he feels for the building's symmetry, its careful proportions, and its air of silent permanence. Inside, the library greets him like an old friend, unchanged, steady, filled with the hush of dust and time. The morning light pools on the marble floor, golden and dappled, and Lucius lets it warm his hands as he prepares his materials for the day. Today is a copyist's day. No patrons scheduled, no scrolls to restore, only hours to spend in silent transcription, a task he approaches with quiet reverence. He selects an older scroll from the collection, a series of pastoral writings from Theocritus, and prepares a fresh sheet of papyrus, running his fingers along its edge, inspecting the weave for flaws, his breath calm and steady. As he writes, the world outside falls away. The scratching of the reed pen becomes a rhythm, a lullaby in ink, each Greek character rendered with patience, each line a step deeper into the world of sheepfolds, vineyards, and country song. Occasionally he looks up, not to check the time. He never keeps track of the hours when copying, but simply to let his eyes rest upon the architecture of the room, the fluted columns, the carved busts of old thinkers, the ceiling beams that creak faintly in the changing light. He wonders sometimes if these walls remember every sentence spoken within them, every reader who ever leaned over a scroll, every whisper of knowledge passed from one century to the next. Around midday, he sets down his pen and stretches, his joints clicking softly as he walks to a small alcove where a water jug rests in the shade. He drinks slowly, savoring the taste of clay-cooled water, then opens the small cloth bundle holding his lunch. Fresh figs, goat cheese wrapped in vine leaves, and a small heel of bread. Sitting near an open window, He watches two sparrows hop along the ledge, pecking at crumbs someone left there yesterday. Below, the city continues on. Louder now, but still distant. The roar of conversation, the clink of metal, the bark of a street vendor selling garum by the ladle. Here in the library, it is always different. As if time stretches thinner, softer, folding over itself like linen, allowing Lucius to dwell in moments that linger, unrushed and clear. After eating, he takes a short walk through the archives. A rear chamber where older scrolls are stored in thicker cases, many written in faded ink by hands now long turned to dust. He opens one, carefully, gently. A fragment of a travel diary by a Roman magistrate who once toured the coasts of Hispania. The words are simple, the observations dry, but Lucius smiles faintly at the detailed list of coastal birds seen along the way. A quiet joy hidden between political duties. He copies a few lines into his own notes, then spends time rearranging some of the storage baskets, humming softly as he works. Later, a student arrives. A boy of maybe 12, sent by his father to fetch a text on the constellations. He is nervous, clearly unfamiliar with libraries, his eyes wide and unsure. But Lucius welcomes him with quiet warmth, guiding him to the appropriate section and even showing him a painted diagram of the stars as they appeared during the reign of Tiberius. The boy's curiosity flickers to life, and Lucius watches as his hands grow steadier with each passing minute, his questions more confident. Before the boy leaves, Lucius gives him a small scrap of parchment with a short quote from Plato written upon it. A keepsake, he says, for the journey home. As the day wanes and the sun begins its descent toward the Tiber, Lucius tidies his work once again, sealing the ink jar, brushing away specks of dust from the copying desk, rolling up the fresh papyrus with care and securing it with string. He feels no urgency, only quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes not from grand accomplishment, but from the gentle fulfillment of small tasks done with care. As he walks home, the city glows with the soft gold of late afternoon. The shadows are long, stretching over the cobbled streets like spilled velvet, and Lucius takes the same quiet route he often prefers, past the stonemason's shop where the chisel sings gently against stone, past the bathhouse where laughter and steam curl upward into the cooling air. He returns to his home and sits for a while with his sandals off, feet cool against the tiled floor, a small lamp flickering beside him as he reads from a volume of old riddles, their wit still sharp, their edges softened by age. He makes a small supper, lentils again, warmed gently over a low flame, with slices of apple and honey. As the darkness deepens, he climbs onto the rooftop of the building, where a small bench waits beneath the stars. He lies there for a time, wrapped in a thin cloak, staring upward as the constellations turn slowly overhead. The same stars the boy had asked about, the same stars written of by the ancient poets, the same stars the scrolls describe in careful, measured lines. And in that moment, Lucius feels what he always feels in such silence. Not loneliness, but belonging. Not distance, but closeness. As if the stars themselves were part of the great library of the world, written in light, meant to be read not all at once, but slowly, over lifetimes, by those patient enough to look upward with quiet wonder. And so, as sleep begins to creep once more into his limbs and the last oil in his lamp sputters gently to rest, Lucius closes his eyes beneath the Roman night, dreaming not of glory or conquest, but of scrolls yet to be read, of pages yet to be turned, and of the silent, steady comfort of a life lived quietly among stories. As dawn breaks once again over the quiet rooftops of Rome, a faint blush of peach and gold spreading across the terracotta tiles, Lucius opens his eyes with the same gentle awareness as always, not startled by alarm or noise, but stirred by the slow brightening of the world beyond his window. The soft weight of a woolen blanket rests on his chest, and he lies still for a moment longer, listening to the subtle music of the morning, the soft flutter of wings as a pigeon settles on the sill, the faint creak of the building settling into warmth, and the far-off murmur of a fountain beginning its gentle song. He stretches slowly, then rises with practiced grace, his steps quiet on the stone floor, his motions a continuation of the calm from the night before. Today feels no different than the day before, and that to Lucius is a kind of comfort. After washing with cool water and carefully trimming the wick of his small clay lamp, he wraps himself in a clean tunic of soft, sun-bleached linen and ties a modest belt around his waist. His sandals, worn but well cared for, are waiting by the door, and with his leather bag once again resting on his shoulder, inside, a folded wax tablet, a flask of water, and a few dried dates, he steps out into the pale morning light. The streets are still quiet, bathed in that golden hush that only belongs to early hours, and he walks with ease, nodding to familiar faces. The baker's boy sweeping ash from the oven, the old man feeding crumbs to birds beneath a vine-covered arch, the washerwoman hanging a damp tunic on a rope strung between two windows. There is peace in repetition, Lucius believes, in the returning pattern of footsteps, greetings, and the sound of the city slowly stretching awake. As he nears the library, he passes beneath a fig tree heavy with fruit and plucks one gently from a low branch, savoring its sweetness as he climbs the library's worn stone steps. He unlocks the door, letting in the soft morning breeze, and breathes in the scent of paper and time. The building feels cool and shaded, still wrapped in its nightly stillness, and he pauses to open the shutters slowly, one by one, letting sunlight fall in quiet stripes across the reading tables and marble floor. Today, his task is one he particularly enjoys: the cleaning and cataloging of a new donation, a collection of scrolls sent from the estate of a recently departed scholar. Each scroll must be unwrapped, inspected, and entered into the ledger with care. And Lucius takes a kind of joy in this quiet welcome, as if each scroll is a guest entering a peaceful sanctuary. He begins with the outer wrappings, soft cloth marked with ink labels, removing each with delicate hands and placing them neatly in a basket. The scrolls beneath are in various conditions, some pristine, others fraying or stained, each carrying the mark of age, of having passed through many hands. One contains a long treatise on the movements of the moon, written in a rounded hand with elaborate headings. Another is a series of dialogues on ethics, the papyrus darkened from years of use. Lucius reads small portions as he works, not to absorb the content fully, but to understand the tone, the voice behind the ink. It is almost as if the scrolls speak to him, not with urgency, but with quiet persistence, like someone whispering not to be heard at once, but over many years. He logs each scroll in the catalog, dipping his stylus carefully into ink, and records the author, the subject, and the condition of the document with steady handwriting. Hours pass this way, unnoticed, marked only by the angle of sunlight as it shifts slowly across the chamber. A junior clerk arrives to assist with the binding of a damaged scroll, and Lucius instructs him with soft words, guiding his hand gently as they align the papyrus sheets and reinforce the spine with a new strip of linen. They speak little, only the necessary words. And yet there is a kind of closeness in the shared silence, in the simple act of caring for something old together. At midday, Lucius steps out into the courtyard behind the library, where a small pool reflects the light in trembling patterns across the colonnade. He eats a quiet lunch of barley bread and cheese, washing it down with a sip of cool water from his flask, then leans back against the sun-warmed wall, letting his eyes drift closed for a short while. He does not sleep, but rests in the half-dreaming state he enjoys, where thoughts wander like drifting clouds, fragments of poetry, images of winding scrolls, the faint memory of a story once told by a passing traveler. Returning to the library, he finds a small group of children waiting just outside, accompanied by their tutor, here to see the scrolls for the first time. Lucius smiles gently and opens the doors wider, inviting them in with a nod, leading them through the cool interior with the quiet gravity of a temple priest. He explains the function of the scroll racks, the way the tags are read, the meaning of the colored cords tied to certain volumes. The children listen with wide eyes, their voices hushed, as if sensing the sacredness of the place. One boy asks if the scrolls are magic, and Lucius replies in a whisper just loud enough to be heard. They are, in their own way. They hold the voices of those who are no longer here, and yet they still speak. The boy nods solemnly, as if understanding something important, and Lucius shows them a small scroll of fables, reading one aloud in a slow, steady voice, letting the rhythm of the words carry like a lullaby through the room. After they leave, the rest of the afternoon passes in peaceful solitude. Lucius continues to inspect the donated scrolls, then shelves a few that have been returned by regular patrons. A philosopher who always takes the same 3 volumes. A woman who prefers stories from the old Greek Isles. The scrolls are returned gently, some marked with slips of parchment where a favorite line has been copied, and Lucius smiles as he sees familiar passages highlighted in soft ink. These are the traces he loves. Not dramatic annotations, but the quiet evidence of minds at work, of hearts moved in silence. As the light grows softer and evening nears once again, he closes the shutters carefully, sweeping the floor with a straw broom, straightening the chairs and folding a loose cloth left behind. The library sleeps easily, as if it too is grateful for the slow, undisturbed flow of the day. Lucius leaves just before sunset, the air now tinged with the scent of cooking fires and crushed herbs, and makes his way through the streets with a peaceful gait, He passes a street performer reciting poetry near the market steps and stops for a moment to listen, recognizing the lines as ones he had copied just a few days ago. The words, carried now by another voice, feel like birds returning home, and he smiles quietly before continuing on. At home, he lights a small lamp and prepares a warm supper, lentil stew with bits of onion and cumin, then sits by the window, watching the evening stars appear one by one. He pulls out a blank parchment and begins writing a short reflection, not for any official record, but for himself. Noting the scrolls he saw today, the child's question about magic, and the particular beauty of the moonlight as it falls across the rooftops tonight. He writes slowly, carefully, without judgment. And when he finishes, he rolls the parchment and places it in a jar with several others like it. A private archive of thoughts no one may ever read, yet valuable to him in ways he cannot fully explain. And then, as always, he prepares for bed, extinguishing the lamp with a gentle breath, stretching out upon the mat with his hands folded over his chest, the scent of parchment still faint on his skin, and the quiet presence of 1,000 sleeping scrolls, somewhere not far away, keeping watch through the night. Morning arrives once again, not with urgency or fanfare, but as it always does in Lucius's quiet world. Slowly, gently, like ink spreading across wet parchment, gradual and certain. A pale light creeps across the tiled roof above his window. Birds murmur in the eaves, and a cool breeze carries the scent of damp stone and rosemary through the open shutters. Lucius stirs beneath his woolen blanket, opens his eyes, and remains still for a while, simply listening to the familiar creaks of the building as it wakes with him. His body knows the rhythm of this life so well that each motion comes almost without thought. The rinsing of the face with cool basin water, the careful binding of his tunic with a leather belt, the slow chewing of a small meal of barley bread and figs eaten while standing near the window, watching the sun climb gently over Rome's rooftops. Today, he decides to leave earlier than usual, walking the longer path to the library through the gardens near the Temple of Juno, where the air smells sweet from recent rains and the hedges are still dotted with droplets that catch the morning light like tiny pearls. His sandals press softly into the damp gravel, and he walks at a pace neither fast nor slow, simply measured, eyes scanning the vines overhead where early birds dart among fig leaves and bees hover sleepily near lavender bushes. As he nears the river, he pauses on a quiet footbridge, leaning on the worn stone railing to watch a barge drift by below, its single oarsman gliding silently through the green water. The Tiber flows calmly this morning, its surface only slightly ruffled by the movement of the boat, and Lucius reflects, not for the first time, how much rivers resemble time, moving forward always, carrying what came before, silent but unceasing. He continues on, arriving at the Atrium Libertatis just as the sun touches its upper facade, casting soft light through its tall windows. Inside, the air is cool and still, just as he left it. And he takes a deep breath as he crosses the threshold, feeling once again that he has stepped not only into a building, but into a sacred rhythm, an invisible thread of continuity that weaves his life into the long story of the library itself. Today he has planned a full morning of restoration work. Several older scrolls have been waiting for attention, including a collection of medical texts that arrived weeks ago in a brittle state, their edges flaking, their ink faded into ghostly whispers. He lays them out on the wide marble work table near the eastern window, where the light is brightest, and begins by gently brushing each surface with a fine, soft brush, removing layers of dust and debris accumulated over time. He works slowly, deliberately, his hands moving with the patience of someone who understands that rushing would mean losing the very thing he seeks to preserve. One scroll has suffered water damage, its center stuck together, its writing nearly unreadable, and Lucius carefully applies a warm cloth to ease the layers apart, humming a quiet tune as he waits for the fibers to relax. As he does, his mind wanders not toward worry or distraction, but into gentle reflection of the scribe who first wrote this text, perhaps in Alexandria or Antioch, in a room filled with the scent of ink and sea breeze, of the physician who used it, running fingers over these very lines while treating a patient long forgotten. These are the lives hidden in every scroll, and Lucius feels a quiet joy in bringing them back to breath, if only for a moment. As midday approaches, he rises to stretch, rolling his shoulders and walking to the outer portico for fresh air. There, he sits on a stone bench in the shade, sharing the space with a small lizard sunning itself on a warm slab nearby. The city hums beyond the library's walls, not loudly but persistently. The rise and fall of voices, the clatter of pots, the bray of a distant mule. Yet here, beneath the colonnade, time feels slowed, as if the library's presence creates a still pool in the current of the day. He unwraps a small meal of boiled eggs, olives, and flatbread, eating without rush, watching sunlight shift across the worn paving stones. A familiar figure appears, Gaius, an elderly former teacher who often visits the library not for research, but for company and silence. Lucius greets him with a nod, and they sit quietly together for a while, saying little, occasionally exchanging a glance, a word about the weather, a shared memory of a scroll they both once read. There is a comfort in these exchanges, a kind of friendship made not through constant talk, but through peaceful companionship and mutual reverence for stillness. After lunch, Lucius returns to the restoration table, refreshed, and resumes work on a scroll of philosophy attributed to an unknown writer, though the style suggests Stoic thought. The ink is faint, but the structure of the sentences reveals a calmness of mind that mirrors his own. Words about acceptance, the nature of time, the importance of living quietly and well. He copies a few passages onto a fresh parchment for preservation, his pen gliding over the surface with practiced ease. Around him, the light softens as afternoon shadows grow longer, and the sound of a broom sweeping a far corridor reminds him that others, too, tend this quiet temple of memory. Occasionally, a visitor enters, a teacher seeking stories of old kings, a girl curious about stars, and Lucius assists them gently, guiding them not only to texts, but toward a deeper patience with their own questions. The scrolls do not rush, and neither should we, he often thinks, passing that thought along in the way he speaks and moves and helps. As evening nears, he sets down his pen, ties up the restored scrolls with fresh linen ribbons, and returns them to their shelves. The act of shelving scrolls is never mechanical for him. It is always something ceremonial, a returning of the voice to its place among the chorus of the past. He closes the shutters slowly, one by one, dimming the light until the library seems to hum with soft shadows, the kind that cradle thoughts rather than hide them. When he leaves, the streets are turning golden again, filled with long rays of setting sunlight and the warm smells of cooking. He walks home through the quieter alleys, passing flowering courtyards and carved stone fountains where water runs endlessly, a gentle music for the evening. At home, he prepares a simple stew with lentils, garlic, and herbs, stirring slowly, the smell filling the room like a memory. He eats by the window, where the light is fading into twilight, and afterward he opens one of his personal scrolls, a small volume of pastoral poems, reading a few stanzas aloud to himself, savoring the cadence like a lullaby. As darkness wraps around the city once more, he cleans his hands of ink and oil, lies down on his mat, and gazes up at the ceiling, where moonlight forms silver shapes through the open shutter. He lets his eyes close, and the day dissolves slowly into stillness, the memory of scrolls, ink, quiet voices, and soft footfalls in a library that never truly sleeps, only dreams, as he does now, of stories still waiting to be told. The morning after a quiet night brings with it the kind of gentle clarity Lucius always finds most comforting. A light mist rising from the city's rooftops, soft sunlight threading between clay tiles, and the hum of doves nesting in the corners of nearby buildings. He wakes slowly, with no rush or urgency, stretching beneath the thin wool blanket, eyes adjusting to the golden hue creeping in through his shutters. After washing and dressing, he prepares a light breakfast. Soaked barley sweetened with a drizzle of honey and a few slices of dried apricot, eaten in silence beside a terracotta oil lamp whose soft flame flickers quietly beside him. Today, he has taken a rare half-day away from the library, not for rest exactly, but to make a visit, a quiet walk to the edge of the Sabura district, where an old friend and scribe, Marius, lives and works in a modest shop filled with inks, pens, and blank scrolls awaiting their words. The route winds past the foot of the Aventine Hill, through streets where ivy climbs brick walls and early market vendors arrange baskets of lentils, onions, and olives. Lucius keeps to the edge of the street, avoiding puddles left by the morning fountain cleaning, and listens to the soft clink of amphorae and the flutter of fabric in shaded doorways. The air carries with it the scent of baked clay and rosemary, and he takes in the quiet signs of life. A woman teaching a child to sweep, a sleepy dog curled in the doorway of a dye shop, an older man sketching a temple on a wax tablet. When Lucius arrives at Marius's shop, he is greeted not by loud chatter or noise, but by the familiar creak of the old wooden door and the scent of ink, vellum, and crushed herbs, scents that always remind him of distant cities and ancient stories. Marius, hunched but cheerful, sits at a low desk beneath a slanted window, carefully illuminating a new copy of a legal manuscript with strokes so fine they look woven rather than written. He does not speak immediately, nor does Lucius, but instead they exchange a slow smile, both men understanding the beauty of shared silence. Marius pours 2 cups of warm spiced tea, brewed with fennel and mint, and they sit in the corner of the shop on low stools, sipping slowly. Their conversation, when it begins, flows like the tea, gently, deliberately, without pressure. They speak of scrolls rediscovered in storage, of a fragment of a lost poem attributed to Ennius, of a recent visit from a scholar who claimed to have traced the footsteps of Homer through old coastal towns. Occasionally, one of them pauses to scratch a note onto a wax tablet, or to open a nearby scroll to reference a line or passage. These conversations are not meant to impress. They are simply a continuation of a lifelong affection for language, memory, and quiet work. Marius shows Lucius a scroll in need of rescue, its edges curling, the ink fading into near oblivion. And together they examine it under the light from the window, turning it gently, murmuring observations as though the scroll were a sleeping animal not to be disturbed. Lucius agrees to take it back with him, to try a preservation method that involves steaming with damp cloth and pressing between polished boards. Before he leaves, Marius hands him a small bundle wrapped in linen, a gift of handmade reed pens and a small bottle of dark ink steeped with myrrh. Lucius accepts it with a nod and a soft word of thanks, and departs just as the sun begins to climb fully into the sky, casting longer shadows behind the buildings. On the walk back, he chooses a quieter route, one that skirts behind a row of villas and leads to a shaded colonnade near an old ivy-covered aqueduct. Here, he pauses to sit on a bench beneath a laurel tree, feeling the slow rhythm of the day settle in his bones like warmth. He watches a pair of young boys float dry leaves in the runoff stream, racing them like ships, their laughter light and distant. A cat lounges on a warm step nearby, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. In this moment, Lucius feels no desire to hurry, no weight of expectation, only the soft presence of time unfolding without demand. When he returns to the library by midday, he finds the usual stillness awaiting him. The familiar sense of beeswax, dust, and old papyrus, the filtered light forming quiet pools across the stone floor. He unrolls the gifted scroll on the preservation table and begins his work, his motions slow and fluid, like the steps of a familiar dance. In the background, the quiet sounds of the library continue, the turning of a scroll, the brushing of sand across a page to fix ink, the soft shuffle of a clerk's sandals. There is a comfort in this return, in the knowledge that the work waits not with impatience but with welcome, like an old friend who never rushes the greeting. As the afternoon wears on, Lucius makes a record of his efforts in the preservation ledger, noting the date, material condition, and techniques used, not for recognition but to continue the thread of knowledge for others who may follow. Later, he spends some time in the reference alcove, reading a section of a text by Varro on the names of Roman gods and their rural rituals, copying a passage that speaks of silence as an offering, a line he copies twice, its simplicity anchoring something inside him. In silence, the gods hear best. He closes the scroll slowly, returning it with care, and takes a moment to sit in the back corner of the library, where a narrow window frames the sky. There, he watches a drifting cloud, its movement barely perceptible, and thinks how every scroll, every copied word, every page passed from hand to hand is like that cloud, quiet, slow, and beautiful in its fleeting passage. As twilight approaches, he gathers his things, washes his hands at the basin, and extinguishes the reading lamps one by one. The library darkens gradually, as if exhaling, and Lucius walks home through the long, golden shadows of evening. He takes a fig from a vendor near the forum, enjoying its sweetness as he walks, and pauses once more at the river's edge to watch the last reflections of daylight ripple across the Tiber. The water moves as it always has, not for him, not for anyone, but simply because it must. And Lucius smiles, not with amusement, but with that quiet recognition that comes from witnessing something ancient and unchanged. Back at home, he unrolls the scroll gifted by Marius once more, sets it gently on his table, and lights a small lamp. He does not read it yet, not tonight, but simply sits beside it, sipping warm water, letting the silence settle around him. In the stillness, in the weightless hush of lamp glow and distant city murmurs, Lucius feels a peace that runs deeper than words. The peace of living quietly, listening to stories carried through centuries, and knowing that in silence, in stillness, he is part of something larger than even Rome. The next morning arrives gently, as it always does, with the slow unveiling of light over the tiled rooftops of the Aventine Hill, the soft rustle of wind through fig trees, and the low murmur of the city gradually awakening beneath the faded stars. Lucius rises quietly, stretching beside his oil lamp and listening to the rhythm of early footsteps on the street below. Merchants opening stalls and bakers feeding their morning fires. He washes, dresses, and prepares a small meal of bread soaked in warm milk and a handful of pine nuts, taken slowly beside the window as the sun touches the horizon with the first blush of gold. Today, his tasks at the library will involve little direct interaction. A peaceful day spent mostly in the cataloging chamber, a long shaded room deep within the building where scrolls are examined, restored, and documented. This quiet work suits Lucius perfectly. The act of preserving knowledge is not only useful but meditative, a kind of moving stillness that allows thoughts to drift like clouds through a clear morning sky. He walks to the library along a familiar path, past neighbors who nod in greeting, past a temple with garlands hung fresh for a feast he has quietly forgotten, past the aqueduct whose constant flowing reminds him of the peaceful continuity of things. Inside the library, the air is cool and scented with cedar wood and beeswax, a combination he has come to associate with care and permanence. In the cataloging room, scrolls are laid out in orderly rows atop marble counters, some open for inspection, others waiting their turn, each marked with a small tag bearing a name, a date, and sometimes just a question. Authorship uncertain, or fragment, possibly Gallic. Lucius begins with a fragmentary work on agriculture, lines in Latin so worn and faint they can only be read at an angle in certain light. And he leans close, breathing steadily, letting his eyes adjust, slowly teasing meaning from the fragile script. He transcribes a few surviving lines, dipping his pen with care, whispering the words aloud as he copies them, the cadence of the Latin comforting and familiar. He thinks about the farmer who once used this text, what he grew, what he hoped for in the seasons, whether he passed the scroll to his son or left it behind in a dusty storeroom. Each scroll feels like a thread in a vast, invisible tapestry. And Lucius, with his pen and his quiet persistence, helps weave these forgotten strands back into the fabric of memory. Mid-morning brings a light knock at the door. A young student named Aurelius, who visits now and then for help with difficult texts. Lucius welcomes him with a small smile, offering a stool and a piece of honeyed bread left from breakfast. Together, they examine a scroll from the eastern provinces, written in a mix of Latin and Greek, and Lucius reads the passages aloud, pausing often to explain the layered meanings of certain phrases. Aurelius listens attentively, sometimes closing his eyes to better hear the rhythm of the words, and Lucius appreciates this. The quiet reverence for language, for thought, for the act of listening itself. When the lesson ends, they part without ceremony, and Lucius returns to his slow and steady work, copying, tagging, storing, cleaning. Occasionally, he breaks to sip from a small clay cup of watered wine, or to stretch his back beneath the window where sun spills like silk across the floor. Outside, the noise of the city rises and falls in waves. The distant ring of temple bells, the echo of laughter from children playing in a courtyard, the bray of a stubborn mule refusing to move. Yet inside, the silence holds, deep and soft as a cloak. By midday, Lucius pauses fully, stepping outside to sit in the courtyard garden that belongs to the library. A quiet space enclosed by vine-covered walls and shaded by two broad olive trees, whose leaves murmur faintly in the breeze. He sits on a stone bench and unwraps a meal of lentils, barley, and roasted carrot, eaten slowly as he watches a butterfly move between flower heads. He thinks about the scrolls again, about the act of writing, of copying, of preserving, and how all of it is like tending a garden, slow, repetitive, unnoticed by most, yet filled with small, enduring beauty. A bird hops across the gravel path near his feet, eyeing his lunch with cautious interest, and Lucius crumbles a bit of bread to share, watching the creature peck and flit away. He finishes eating, brushes crumbs from his tunic, and returns to his desk, refreshed not by rest, but by the simple act of being, of sitting, noticing, breathing without rush. The afternoon hours are quiet and productive. He restores 2 scrolls, binds one in fresh linen to prevent further unraveling, and updates the catalog with a note about a misattributed text that had puzzled the librarians for weeks. Such small victories, unnoticed by the world, bring him a private kind of joy. The satisfaction of placing one more stone in the great silent monument of knowledge. As the shadows lengthen, he stands at the reading window once more, observing the way the light moves slowly across the stacked scrolls, as if time itself were thumbing gently through the shelves. He lights the lamps one by one, then pauses, listening to the faint echo of footsteps in the hallway, the last patrons departing for the evening. The library gradually empties, leaving only Lucius and one junior clerk to close and tidy. Together they gather scattered scrolls, return cushions to benches, and wipe the surfaces clean of dust and crumbs. Before leaving, Lucius passes by the main hall, touching the edge of a favorite shelf as he walks. A quiet ritual, a farewell of sorts. On his way home, the streets glow with lamplight and the smell of evening meals,